Hey everyone, welcome back to this channel. It's been a little while. I was off traveling to multiple countries in Europe and in Asia, and I thought, as a way of sort of coming back a little bit, sharing with you some of the digs that I had the chance to do in Europe mostly, and I felt I could do like a three-part. I picked up about 50 records between Portugal, France, Germany. So I thought just section this a little bit into a three-part kind of mini series. And in this part one, I want to talk about the digging experience in Portugal, and I want to show you some Portuguese, Brazilian, Angolan, Cape Verdian records, mostly. Um, Most of them picked up in Portugal. I think a couple of them picked up later in the journey, either in France or in Germany, but mostly from Portugal. And then maybe show you some footage of the shops that I went to, and just kind of like a travel journal sort of a thing, but with records, which is always, the bonus. I mean, frankly, I don't go traveling to buy records. Records just sort of happen as if you're a record nerd, you go to a new city. One of the first things you do is you look on the map. Where are the record stores, if there are record stores, and you know, in Portugal, there's a lot of record stores, a lot of good record stores. So in Portugal, well, started off in Spain actually. Spent a few days in Madrid. I say my partner and I. We spent a few days in Madrid. Got to be honest with Madrid. It was the first time I went to Madrid, and I was more there to enjoy the sights, go to the Prado, and visit the city. And it was a very very fulfilling experience actually. And the record stores in Madrid sort of happened by accident. I wasn't really looking for them, because it was our first few days in Europe. I was not in the mood to go digging, but I came across a few stores, and I gotta say, there's nothing to write home about. There was no records that I really felt strongly about. But mind you, I didn't spend much time in the stores, and as I said, I sort of came upon the record stores by accident most of the time. We were walking down the street, and then there was a record store, and I'd said to my partner, "I'll spend 5 minutes in there and have a look." But in any case, I didn't really buy anything in Madrid. I bought a couple of CDs, but that was really it. So then we headed to Portugal, and I've been to Portugal in 2016, and got to say that I have some existing knowledge about the Portuguese music scene, and I was looking for certain titles, and I knew sort of in my head what to expect, having been to Lisbon, and it's always good to have the sort of base knowledge, when you go to a country like that, because a music scene in a country like Portugal is huge. There's a lot of, and there's a lot of unknowns as well. So I knew I could find Portuguese new wave, post punk records. That I could find Brazilian records. I could find Angolan records, and you know that sort of shaped my kind of like way I was digging. I was there to buy just local records. So we started in Porto, wonderful city Porto, very hilly though. I mean, if you fear hills, I've got a theory that there's no flat streets in Porto. They all either go up or go down. It sits by a lovely river, and there's this iconic bridge, which you'll see on the cover of one of the records that I bought later. There's some beautiful sort of like central touristy areas. The record stores, though, they're located more, in the adjacent suburbs, um, which is where you find the cool stuff. The tourist area is more like, you know, it's where people go. But the first store I hit was called Porto Calling, which was a nice little, well curated store. The owner was super nice, turned me on to some local experimental music. I said that's what I'm after. Some stuff that I couldn't buy anywhere else, and he was super nice. He was very helpful. Then I also visited a place called Louis Louis, and again, those two guys that run the shop were absolutely top notch. We had a great talk about music, and we exchanged a little bit about. I was telling them about the scene in Melbourne, and there as well picked up some really lovely Portuguese jazz and experimental ambient records. And the third shop I want to talk about is called Circus Records, and that was a very special shop because it's also the shop that houses a label called Jazz Ego. And one of the guys who runs the label, runs the shop, Andre, we talked for ages together. We just had, and he was so knowledgeable about the Melbourne jazz scene. He knew all the records that I was talking about. It's a great exchange, and we talked about his label. So maybe I want to start with these records that I picked up from him at Circus Records. So as I said, his label is called Jazz Ego. I'll just show you there. There we go. Yeah, there we go. It's a play on words, he told me in Portuguese. So I picked up a couple of his records at Circus Record. Now, these are new local sort of future jazz, broken beats, new jazz types of records. I talk about these records quite often when I talk about the Melbourne jazz scene. I talk about bands like Got and the JK Group and all that. These are very similar sounding. Brand new album by Eza. So the band's called Eza Cosmic Jazz from Porto, Portugal. Love the sleeve. The record is just very cosmic jazz, spacey jazz, lots of electronics. Super high recommendation, super nice record. And the other record that I picked up from him, from his label, is equally as enthralling, and it's the act is Minus and Mr. Dolly, and the album is called Giant Stops. Obviously, we get the reference to Giant Steps, Giant Stops. And I think, from memory, Minus and Mr. Doll, one of them is the other owner of Jazz Ego, from memory. And that, again, is some, high quality future jazz, if you like. Anything on the London scene, like, things like Sons of Kemet or... Matthew Halsall, that kind of vibe, but with a more electronic kind of tinge, that would appeal to you. So these are the first records that I want to show you. I feel maybe I'll show you them in whichever order. Then we moved on to Coimbra. I would absolutely recommend a visit to Coimbra. It's a small city. It's not near the sea, it's inland, but it's by a river. It's small but packs a huge punch in terms of it's almost, a concentrate of Portugal in a small city. It's got nice, beautiful hills. The university is very well known. It's one of the oldest in Europe, and you can visit it and everything. It's got some sublime views, because it's hilly, you've got this kind of panoramic aspect. You know, it's got some lovely cobblestone streets and one really great record store. Lucky Lux. That they've only got one record store in Coimbra because it's a small town, but really, in terms of value for money, packing the best punch as well. Lucky Lux was probably the best record store I went to. Full stop. You know, like it you know, and it's often like this in provincial towns. Like you go to big capital cities or large cities, and there's more demand for things, and you know the records are, you know, as a result maybe more expensive, or maybe more people know about them. And you go to a small town like the town where I come from in France, which I'll talk to in a couple of next installments. Records that I found there for next to nothing are unbelievable, but it's because people don't know about those records. Anyway, I digress. Lucky Lux, beautiful shop. The owner, whose name escapes me now, because I talked to him for two hours. I was in the shop for 2 hours solid. We talked about all sorts of things: Portuguese jazz, Angolan, samba. We talked about Brazilian bossa nova. I mean, it was just really a fluid conversation, and I bought lots of records from him as well. They're all kind of very reasonably priced. So I'll show you a few Portuguese records from the most of them from the 70s ish, which I picked up between Porto and Coimbra. I'm not going into detail whichever shop I bought where, because that would just take the fun out of this. But I'll show you. Okay, so this was a big want for me. It's been a big one since 2016 when I discovered the name Rao Kiao. Rao Kiao is undoubtedly the most famous name on the Portuguese jazz scene. And this is his first album, which is widely considered as the very first 100% Portuguese jazz record ever made. Malpetui is the name of the album. And for a first Portuguese jazz, it's an absolute tour de force, this album. It's absolutely worth every, you could pit this against any other, US jazz or European jazz record that you consider great, and this wouldn't sound out of place at all. Malpetui is really a very highly accomplished piece of music. And Rao Kiao is the band leader. He plays saxophone, alto and tenor sax, and flutes, and there's a little bit of percussion. We have here electric and acoustic piano. We have double bass, drums, and some vocals. Very highly recommended. From 1976, so the first Portuguese jazz record, 1976. And whilst I was there, I picked up a record that you see absolutely everywhere. This one came from Lucky Lux, actually. Rao Kiao Fado Ballads. Now, just to give you a little bit of a context, so Rao Kiao, he made probably 5 or 6 jazz albums, his first 5 or 6, and then he made this album kind of a crossover between Fado, which is, if you don't know, the local brand of folk music. I would call Fado a sort of crossover between folk and blues, but very obviously with a strong Portuguese tinge. I hope I'm not offending him. I actually went to 2 Fado gigs in Lisbon. And and what you get from fado is very highly melancholic, very highly melancholic. It's played on typically two or three instruments. The fado gig I went to see had classical guitar, Portuguese guitar, and a bit of double bass. They don't always have three instruments. Sometimes you get at least a Portuguese guitar and a classical guitar. Depends. And what you've got there is Raquel making an album which is jazzy fado. So it's a combination between classical guitar and some sax. As you can see, he plays the sax there. And that album was huge in Portugal. It broke him into the mainstream. So very cheap album. You can get this just practically everywhere you go in Portugal. It's worth getting. And since I'm talking about fado, I have to talk about this absolute masterpiece, Carlos Paredes, Guitarra Portuguesa. Now, this is a Portuguese guitar, by the way. That's what we're talking about, Portuguese guitar. Carlos Paredes is a native of Coimbra, where I was, and this is where I bought this record. And the guy from Lucky Lux called this Champions League. He said, you know, if you're a football fan, as I am, that makes just total sense straight away. That's in the pecking order of Portuguese record is very highly. I saw this record plenty of times in Portugal. It's not a hard record to find, I guess, because it was pressed multiple times. Carlos Paredes was a master player of the Portuguese guitar, and Amalia Rodrigues, who is the queen of fado, begged him to be his backing, her backing player, and he said that he would never be someone's player. He wanted to make his own music, so all his records are made under his name. And he sadly died a few years ago, but very highly recommend. This is solo Portuguese guitar. It's very vibrant, very touching. And I picked this one up in Berlin, not in Portugal, but I thought I'd just put them together. This is a release on Amiga, which I'll talk about in my second installment, because, you know, it's worth talking about Amiga for a while. And Carlos Paredes, master of the Portuguese guitar. I found this in a shop in Berlin for very cheap, and I thought, you know, as I'd already bought this one. This one's an interesting thing. It's at the festival in Berlin, and they're spoken word in German, and he plays beautiful Portuguese guitar as a sort of background. And these are poems, you know, they're just recited poems in German. So yeah, there you go. And this is another Lucky Lux score. Very cool. Fasto por este rio acima, which means up this river, is an absolute classic psych folk, Portuguese folk music, psychedelic folk album. It's super well known in Portugal, and this version comes with the central booklet and everything's complete, and was super cheap as well, unbelievably cheap. Yeah, this is a classic Portuguese folk, psych folk album. Obviously, understanding the lyrics would help, which I don't speak Portuguese at all. So, but I trust that, you know, with time, I'll probably look up some translations and just work out what the story goes through. But Fausto from 1973, I think it was, or something along those lines. And finally, we headed out to Lisbon, which I'd been to, and I love Lisbon. It's one of my favorite cities in the world, really. And Lisbon's got lots of record stores. But in saying this, I didn't go to that many. On Tuesday and Saturday in Lisbon, there's the Feira de Ladra, which is a giant flea market. If you look at my video from Lisbon from 2016. On my channel, you'll see I've got some footage there of the Feira de Ladra. And so I said to my partner who loves flea markets, I said, there's this big flea market, let's just go. So on Saturday morning, we just headed to Alfama, which is the area in Lisbon where you find the market. And we walked around the market. There were some records here and there. I was just looking. It was a beautiful day. And then as I headed up to the top near the Pantheon, I noticed that there was a full record fair in the middle of the market, Feira do Vinil, and I've got some footage there, which was great because basically all the stores I wanted to go to had a stall there, and consequently they were closed for the day. Like for example, I wanted to go to Tabato Records and Groovy, and both of them were represented so it was great. I got the chance to buy some nice Brazilian, Angolan, some Portuguese records, some post-punk that I was looking for. I mean, that sort of thing. So it was really cool to come across that, and I didn't really buy records anywhere else in Lisbon. It was mostly at that record fair, and there were items that I could have spent a lot of coin on, like some Brazilian originals, but 250 euros, 300 euros a pop. I just wasn't prepared to spend that kind of money, which in hindsight maybe I will regret later, but it doesn't matter. So I'll show you the rest of the records that I picked up here and there. And I might start with some post-punk records, which... so one of the bands I was quite familiar with before going to Portugal is GNR, Grupo Novo de Rock. That's what it stands for. That's their very first album. Now, I could have picked this up on records, absolutely. It's their first album. It's a classic. And it's worth getting for the B-side Avarias, which sounds like Can, basically. It's just them just fucking around with a kind of repetitive looping. It's got, the vocals are great. Now this iteration of the band features a guy I'm going to talk about in a second. His name is George Lima Barreto. And he went on to form the band, or to join the band Telectu, which I was also familiar with from 2016. Unfortunately, the records are hard to find. I know Stunty's a big fan of Telectu, but that's a band that I came across the first time I went to Portugal, and I sort of was looking for one record in particular, which I was able to find at the record fair. Another GNR record that I picked up, which is fantastic, is Psychopatria. And here you can see the famous Porto Bridge with iconic shot of this diver. That's Porto, basically. If you go to Porto, it still looks exactly like this. This is more like a new wave. This is their third album, third or fourth. It's from 1986. This one here is Independencia, is from 1981. That's from 81. That's from 80. Now, in hindsight, probably would have loved to have buy this on wax, because I could have, but when you're carrying 20, 30, 40 records, sometimes you have to make choices, and that was cheap, and I'm happy with it. So this I picked up in Porto, and then at the record fair, at the Feira de Ladra, I was able to finally get a copy of the very first Telectu record with the great George Lima Barreto. Now this is a reissue of their first album, because finding these records, I went to a lot of record stores in Portugal, and I saw Telectu records maybe twice, and the first time they were like, the price was out of my price range. So I'm glad to have got this. This is very avant-garde, experimental, post-punk. It's very hard to define what they're doing at times. It's 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 a mix of things, and it was reissued in 2019 by Golden Pavilion. So this is the issue that I got, which was very affordable, and I'm happy with it. I don't, not craving originals. And another post-punk album that I picked up, but this one is on CD. Very, very, very important band again, Mao Morta, and that's the second album from 1988. And this one is a very industrial post-punk, somewhere between um, Dead Can Dance and Einstürzende Neubauten, and maybe a bit of Bauhaus in there, chucked in there. Mao Morta, very, very, very cool album. I picked this up, and then since I'm talking about more recent music, I picked up three albums by this Porto drummer, and his name is João Pais Felipe. That's him, and so he's a local Porto drummer, and this was recommended to me by the guys at Louis Louis and at Porto Calling, because he used to work in the shop with them in both. I think he worked in both shops. He worked at Louis Louis for sure for a while, and this guy, as I say, is a drummer, and he teams up with other musicians, and he makes experimental records, and he just layers a lot of percussions and some drums. It's very it's ambient, drony, experimental. We're in this kind of wheelhouse. This one here is with Bernd Friedman, who plays Stuff. You can see there. This is from 2021. Lovely record, absolutely fantastic. It's called Automatic Music Volume 1. And I also picked up this fabulous record with João Pais Felipe, and this is with a guy called Julius Gabriel, who I think is from Porto as well, and it's called the band's called Paziel. I don't know if you see this. There you go, and that's got saxophone and organ and percussion, and that is very drony, very experimental, kind of crat rocky, if you will. Superb record, just really, really, really highly recommended. What struck me was it was mastered by Mikey Young, who's from Melbourne. Interesting, I thought. And the last João Pais Felipe that I got is one that came out on CD only, Sun Oddly Quiet, which I bought in Louis Louis. It was recommended to me by the guys in Louis Louis in Porto. João Pais Felipe. Again, experimental percussion record with some instrumentation layered through. Very, very cool. You can listen to them online. Now, I'm going to finish off with some Portuguese colonies type of music. And I reckon arguably my favorite score of the whole trip in Portugal, probably these Angolan records. I mean, this here, I absolutely love this record. This is Rui Mingas, Angola. Now, this is his first record, which also appeared under the title Africa Negra. You might have seen it's got another. I might put the sleeve somewhere here, so that you've seen that record. It's the same record, bar for the first song, which was changed, but it's the same record. It's Angolan Samba, spelled Semba, which is a mixture of acoustic guitar, percussion, and a sort of folky vocal style. It's not African music as we sort of often imagine, which is like very percussive, and this is more kind of chilled out, laid back. Bonga, also from Angola, is also a great exponent of that music, and I bought the Bonga records in 2016, and this time I bought Rui Mingas records. This is from 1976. The previous owner put the sticker in 1977, which is cool. It's fantastic, absolutely amazing music. And I bought this at Lucky Luck's very cheaply. And at the Feira de Ladra, at the flea market, I picked up for very cheap at the same time as the Selectu. I picked up the Rui Mingus, the second album, which is also absolutely top notch, which is from, I don't know, you can check it. And I learned that Rui Mingus passed away on the 4th of January this year. You know, strange coincidence. I also bought at the at the flea market. I also bought a couple of killer Cape Verdian record. Cabo Verde or Cape Verde is a little island between Africa and Europe, which is a Portuguese colony. And I picked up. This is a freaking classic as well. The musical styles of Cape Verde are Morna and Caldera, which are basically local island folk music. Caldera being more sort of percussive, more joyous, and Morna being a bit more sullen, folky maybe. And the artist here is Maninho Mavos de San Nicolau, and I think the band's called Voz de San Nicolau, and the album is called Fundo del Mare Palinha. Superb record again, original press in absolute mint condition. Very happy to get this. Very funky and percussive, and the other one, Cape Verdean record, a bit more expensive, but really worth every penny, was this record, Evolução Africa, by Mongoli One, the band, also, as I said, also from Cape Verde, and it's a collaboration from Luis Moraes, and I already have some Luis Moraes records. I mean, Luis Moraes is an absolute legend in Portugal. Is absolutely phenomenal. And then I picked up some Brazilian. I've got 3 more Brazilian records. So these come from this one is from the flea market. I just took a punt on this because it's a record that I sort of seen here and there, but it's a little bit under the radar. It's Maria Bethânia. She's the sister of Caetano Veloso. And this is a very experimental record. It's lots of songs. Like if you look at the track list, there's like 50 songs, all very short, and it's kind of psychedelic sound collage and a lot of bizarre kind of spoken word pieces. Yeah, no, it's that was cheap. So and I love that it's still got the sticker from the shop in Lisbon, where this was bought. Now, one of maybe the one that I spend the most coin on, it's the original Elenco, Sylvia Telles. Sylvia Telles is probably maybe one of the least famous singers on the bossa nova scene in Brazil in the early 60s, but this record is absolutely to die for. The voice is, I mean, it's a classic bossa nova. Bossa Balanto Balada, with songs by Vinicius de Moraes, Carlos Jobim. It's just classic bossa, classic bossa. And the last Brazilian record I want to show you, and this one I bought in Berlin actually, but I thought I'll just add it to this collection, is this reissue of Bahia com F, Maria de Fatima. So in Berlin there's a label called Alta Cat, and whilst I was in Berlin I bought a couple of those records. This is a beautiful reissue of a fantastic, again, bossa infused record, but with synths, which is interesting. So there you go. These are my Portugal loosely digs. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a bit long, I'm sorry. But you know, you can leave me some comments if you feel like, and talk to me. And my second installment will be with German digs. I've got a lot less, so it will be shorter. Take care.